You know, the Brian Kohberger case had the entire country watching, expecting this massive, dramatic trial. But it didn't end that way. Nope. It ended with a single document. So how did we get from a horrific crime with no suspects to a signed confession? Let's break it down.
And here it is. This is the piece of paper that brought one of the most followed true crime cases in recent memory to a sudden halt. You can see the key line right there. The defendant, Brian C. Kohberger, stipulate to the following plea agreement. After all the speculation, all the legal maneuvering, those are the words that just shut it all down.
And if there was any doubt about how final this was, well, here you go. That is Brian Kohberger's own signature. This wasn't a jury finding him guilty. This was him admitting it himself. And just like that, the case was over.
Okay, so we know how the story ends, but that's the final chapter. The real question is, how did this story even begin? How did investigators, who started with basically nothing, build a case so airtight that it led directly to this confession?
Well, the entire sprawling investigation really hinged on one single thing. One piece of evidence left behind at the scene. One crucial mistake that would end up unraveling everything.
At the scene, police find this tan leather knife sheath lying on the bed right next to Madison Mogen. And on the button snap of that sheath, they find DNA. Even better, it's a perfect sample, a single source of male DNA. This is a huge break, right? Well, yes and no. They immediately run it through CODIS, that's the big national FBI database of convicted criminals, and they get nothing. Crickets, no match. So they have the killer's DNA profile, but absolutely no name to attach to it.
So with CODIS coming up as a dead end, investigators had to pivot. They had to turn to something newer, something way more revolutionary, and frankly, a technology that's still pretty controversial. But it was their only shot at turning that ghost of a DNA profile into an actual name.
Right. This is the big question, isn't it? The government's own powerful, expensive database comes up empty. Where do you possibly go from there? Well, the answer lies in the DNA that millions of us have voluntarily sent to public websites just to figure out our own family histories.
It's a technique called investigative genetic genealogy, or IgG, and it is an absolute game changer. Think of it less like looking for a suspect's file in a police cabinet and more like building a family tree, but in reverse. You aren't looking for the suspect himself, you're looking for, say, his third cousin who uploaded their DNA to a public site years ago. From there, you work your way back through time to find.
So here's how it actually works. First, they take that unknown DNA from the crime scene and upload it to public genealogy databases. The goal isn't a direct hit, it's to find distant relatives. Once they find one, the real, painstaking work begins. Genealogists use public records, census data, obituaries, you name it, to build a family tree. They trace the family lines up to find a common ancestor, and then trace all the different branches back down until they can pinpoint a potential suspect.
And this timeline shows you just how it played out in this case. At first, state police efforts came up empty. But then, on December 19th, the FBI gets involved and boom, they deliver the breakthrough tip, the name Brian Kohberger. Now, to confirm it without tipping him off, investigators conduct a trash pull at his parents' home. They literally go through the family's garbage, find a Q-tip with DNA from Kohberger's father, and compare it to the DNA from the sheath. It was a near-perfect parent-child match. That was it. They had their man.
Okay, so they have a suspect. Case closed, right? Not so fast. Identifying your guy is one thing. Building a case that can actually survive in a courtroom against a tough defense team, that is a whole different ballgame. And before any talk of a plea could even happen, the defense launched an all-out attack on the very foundation of the state's investigation.
They did this by filing for what's known as a Franks hearing. Now, this is a huge legal gamble. It's basically a Hail Mary where the defense argues that investigators either lied or were just completely reckless with the truth in the paperwork they used to get their search warrants. And the stakes were massive. If the defense won, key evidence could get thrown out, and the entire case could just collapse.
And the defense threw absolutely everything at the wall to see what would stick. They argued the eyewitness account was shaky. They claimed the police misrepresented cell phone data to create a false stalking narrative. They said the whole timeline was a fabrication and that investigators flat out ignored other potential suspects. They were trying to poke holes in every single part of the prosecution's story. But in the end, the judge just wasn't buying it. See, to win a Franks hearing, you have to clear a really high bar. You have to show that law enforcement deliberately lied or showed a reckless disregard for the truth. And as you can see from the court order itself, the judge found the defense failed to carry his preliminary burden and denied the motion.
With that one ruling, the prosecution's entire chain of evidence, the DNA, the cell data, everything was officially ruled admissible and locked in for trial.
That denial of the Franks hearing, that was the decisive moment. It wasn't just another legal loss for the defense, it was the move that put them in checkmate. With all of their evidence now legally bulletproof, the prosecution was holding an overwhelmingly powerful hand. So you have to realize once that judge upheld the warrants, the legal fight was basically over. The DNA on the sheath was coming in, the cell phone data was coming in, the defense was completely out of options. They were facing a mountain of validated evidence, and going to trial was no longer a risk, it was a guaranteed loss.
Which brings us right back to where we started, the plea agreement. Here, you can see the specific terms. Kohberger pleaded guilty to 1 count of burglary and 4 counts of murder in the first degree, admitting to everything the prosecution had accused him of.
For the 4 counts of murder, Brian Kohberger received 4 consecutive life sentences.
And on top of that, an additional 10 years for the burglary charge, making absolutely sure he would never be eligible for parole. So the legal saga of Brian Kohberger is over. But the story of the technology that solved it, that's really just getting started. As millions and millions of people use DNA kits to explore their family trees, they are also, unintentionally, creating one of the most powerful crime-solving tools imaginable. This case proves how a single, tiny DNA sample can unravel a complex mystery, and it really begs the question, how is this technology going to reshape justice in the years to come?